If you ask Murphy, the 90-pound pit bull currently curled inside a cardboard box 2 sizes too small, he'll tell you, life's not about fitting in. It's about claiming the box and pretending you're a cat. And really, who's going to argue with him? Welcome to Vale Marks, where stories bark, meow, and occasionally nap on your laptop keyboard. This isn't just another dog tale. It's a heartfelt rebellion, a comedy of fur, and a quiet miracle wrapped in snoring and snark. Stay with us until the very end, because buried beneath the laughter is a lesson you won't want to miss. Clara hadn't stepped outside much in the last 4 months. The world felt too loud, too fast, and frankly, too indifferent. After losing her mother to a quiet but stubborn illness and her cat Juno shortly after, her companion of 16 years, it was as if a chapter in her life had slammed shut, and she didn't know how to turn the page. Juno had been there through everything: breakups, rejections, 3 published books, and 20 drafts that never made it. Juno didn't judge, didn't interrupt, didn't expect anything beyond a warm lap and occasional treats. But now, the apartment was silent. Not just quiet, hollow. Clara, once a disciplined writer who could pump out 2,000 words before lunch, had barely scribbled a sentence in months. Her typewriter gathered dust, and her laptop screen reflected only her own tired eyes, not ideas. The coffee tasted bland. The couch felt stiff. Everything familiar had turned foreign. Then came that one Tuesday. She hadn't planned to go anywhere. She hadn't dressed for the day, let alone imagined setting foot outside. But something, some tug in her chest that she couldn't name, drew her out. It was subtle, like a thread she didn't realize was connected to her heart until it started pulling. Without knowing why, Clara found herself in the parking lot of the local rescue center. She sat in her car for a long time, watching the sliding doors open and close for other people. Happy couples, families with kids, college students looking for a weekend distraction. Clara didn't look like them. She didn't even feel like herself. But the pull hadn't stopped, so she followed it inside. The shelter smelled of bleach and rubber toys. The walls were lined with metal kennels, each home to a dog who wanted nothing more than to be chosen. Some barked wildly, jumping at the bars, trying to charm with wagging tails. Others sulked quietly in corners, their eyes saying what their mouths couldn't. Clara walked slowly, unsure what she was even looking for. Not a replacement for Juno. That would be ridiculous. There was no replacing a soul. That's when she saw him. In the far back, past the noise and chaos, lay a dog that didn't seem to belong. He was big, maybe too big. A stocky, brindle-coated pit bull with eyes that drooped like heavy curtains. He wasn't barking, he wasn't pacing, he wasn't even sitting like the rest. Instead, he was curled up in the smallest cardboard box Clara had ever seen, the kind used for delivering books or tea bags. He barely fit. His haunches spilled over one side and his massive head over the other. But he didn't care. His eyes were closed and he was breathing slowly, like a cat napping in a sunbeam. Clara stopped in her tracks. It wasn't his size or breed or even the absurdity of the box that got her. It was the way he looked. Not asleep, but surrendered. As if he had long given up on anyone finding him. And yet, he still found comfort in a cardboard box. Something about him reminded her of Juno. Not in shape or sound or smell, but in spirit. That same calm surrender, that quiet dignity, that unspoken question. Are you going to leave too? She knelt slowly outside his kennel. His ears twitched at the sound, but he didn't open his eyes. Clara whispered, unsure why. "Hey, buddy." Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, the big dog stirred. He lifted his head, stretched out a paw, and rose. Not quickly, not eagerly, just purposefully. He walked to the front of the kennel and sat. Then he looked at her, really looked. His eyes were golden brown, soft at the edges, old in ways that made Clara feel young and foolish for all her sadness. He tilted his head slightly, and then he did something she didn't expect. He wagged once, just once, like a period at the end of a long sentence. The volunteer standing nearby looked surprised. Wow, that's Murphy. He usually ignores people, likes his box more than humans. Murphy, Clara echoed, still kneeling. Yeah, 4 years old. Came from a rough situation. We can't get him to engage with anyone. He's different. Clara nodded slowly, still locked in that gaze. She didn't hear the volunteer continue talking. All she could hear was that pull again, the one that brought her here. But now it had a face. The staff opened the gate. Murphy stepped out and, without hesitation, walked straight to Clara, pushed his enormous head into her shoulder and sat his 90-pound frame directly onto her lap. She fell back onto her heels with a surprised laugh that turned into a soft sob. He rested his head on her shoulder and let out a sigh. A long, warm, rumbling sigh that felt like an anchor being dropped into her chest. Something cracked open in Clara. Not painfully, not violently, gently, like an old door unsealing after a long winter. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd locked herself up inside. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck and whispered, "You don't know it yet, but you just saved me." Later, when the adoption papers were signed and Murphy climbed into the back seat of her car like he'd done it 1,000 times before, Clara glanced at him through the rearview mirror. He was already curled up in a new box, the cardboard one the shelter had used to store toys. Way too small. But he didn't care, and neither did she. Because some meetings aren't accidents. They're reminders, whispers from somewhere older than words that say, This is for the days you thought you'd never smile again." And for the first time in months, Clara drove home with a story inside her. One she didn't have to invent. One that had already begun, with fur, a crooked tail, and a heart big enough to hold hers. The rain had started that morning, steady and cold, tapping against the windows like a quiet metronome. Clara stood in her kitchen with a cup of coffee she'd reheated 3 times, but still hadn't sipped. Her new roommate, if that's what you could call a 90-pound Pitbull with the soul of a cat, was snoring softly by the door, curled up in a crumpled moving blanket she had tossed on the floor the night before. Murphy had come home with her less than 24 hours ago. The decision, while impulsive, hadn't felt reckless. It had felt inevitable. Like some part of her had known all along he'd be coming. Still, she had imagined something very different. She had pictured walks in the park, quiet evenings with Murphy curled at her feet while she typed out the next chapter of her comeback novel. She had envisioned a loyal, obedient companion who'd sense her moods, listen intently, and, most importantly, not climb the furniture. What she got was something else entirely. Murphy, as it turned out, did not sit at anyone's feet. Instead, he claimed the highest, most inconvenient places in the house as his throne. The backrest of the living room couch, for example. Not the seat. No, that would have been too normal. Murphy balanced his hulking body along the top like a feline gargoyle, curling his paws beneath him, tail twitching, and eyes watching everything from above like he was surveying his kingdom. He didn't bark. He barely wagged, but he had the most dramatic yawns Clara had ever seen, and he did it every single time she tried to train him. "Murphy, sit! Yawn! Murphy, off the counter!" Yawn. Blink, stretch. It was infuriating, hilarious, and completely disarming. Then there was the laptop. Clara had just opened her manuscript for the first time in months, her fingers hovering over the keys when Murphy leapt, yes, leapt, onto the desk, circled once, and collapsed directly on top of her MacBook. His giant body pressed down every key, freezing the screen on an accidental string of garbled text. She tried to push him off gently. He blinked at her, sighed loudly, and rolled to one side, still on top of the keyboard. "This is not helping," she whispered, trying not to laugh and cry at the same time. Later that afternoon, she found him wedged into a cardboard box from her last grocery delivery. It was clearly too small. His legs flopped out at odd angles, and the box itself had begun to buckle under his weight. But he seemed content, like he'd found some strange sense of safety in the tight walls and the crinkle of cardboard. Clara stood there watching him for a long while, Tuna the cat glaring from the corner like a betrayed sibling. It was her box, her spot. And Murphy had claimed it without hesitation. The turf war was real. Tuna, small but fierce, began mounting a slow campaign to reclaim her territory. There were cold stares from bookshelves, strategic counternaps near the heating vent. And once, Clara walked in to find the two of them sleeping side by side inside the same box, as if a truce had been silently negotiated overnight. And then, there was the Roomba. One morning, Clara turned it on to clean the living room while she made tea. 10 minutes later, she returned to find Murphy sitting motionless in the center of the rug, on top of the vacuum. Apparently, he had mistaken it for a mobile snack tray. Or maybe it annoyed him. Either way, the poor Roomba was stuck under his considerable weight, beeping pathetically for rescue. Clara stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, heart aching from trying not to laugh. Murphy turned his head slowly as if to say, "What?" But not everything was funny. There were nights when Clara stared at the ceiling, unsure of where her life was going. The words still didn't come easily. The grief still stung in odd places. The silence, even with Murphy snoring at the foot of the bed, sometimes felt like it had teeth. One night, after a frustrating day of half-written pages and a headache that wouldn't quit, she found herself crying softly on the couch. Her back ached from the way she'd been sitting, twisted around to accommodate Murphy's preferred spot. Her heart ached from the weight of everything that hadn't healed yet. She didn't even realize he'd moved until she felt it, Murphy pressing his forehead against hers. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't lick her face or whimper or try to climb into her lap like a cartoon dog. He just leaned in, slow and certain, and rested his giant head against hers with a long, low sigh. That sigh again. The same one he'd let out in the shelter when he crawled into her lap. The same one that seemed to say, "You don't have to do this alone." Clara exhaled, for the first time in what felt like days. She stroked his back, and he didn't move. She didn't either. Later, when she stood up to stretch and refill her tea, she looked back at him curled in the corner of the couch, one leg flopped over a pillow, snoring like a tiny freight train. And she realized something. Murphy didn't fit into any box, not Tuna's, not society's, not even the one she had built in her mind for what healing was supposed to look like. He wasn't the obedient dog she thought she needed. He didn't listen. He didn't fetch. He didn't wait for permission, but he showed up. In the smallest ways, in the weirdest moments, in the places between sorrow and laughter, in the strange softness of a cardboard box and the heavy warmth of a head resting quietly on hers. Murphy didn't need to be like anyone else. He was just living fully, stubbornly, honestly. And maybe that was the exact lesson Clara had forgotten how to give herself. Not to be perfect, not to perform, but simply to be, just as she was. Before Murphy, Clara's life ran on structure. She lived by word counts and scheduled blocks of silence. Her writing routine was sacred. Up by 7, coffee by 7:30, seated by her desk at 8. 1,000 words an hour. No excuses, no interruptions. Not even the soft, persistent meow of her old cat, Juno, had ever broken through that self-imposed discipline. Discipline was how Clara coped, with grief, with deadlines, with doubt. And for the longest time, it had worked. But Murphy didn't care about discipline. On day 3 of living together, he casually shattered every system she had left. It started with the couch. Clara had a favorite spot. Right side cushion, feet tucked beneath her, laptop balanced on her knees, a lumbar pillow pressed behind her back. It was where most of her novels had taken shape. That corner of the couch had always been hers, as predictable as punctuation. Then came Murphy. He didn't just sit on the couch. He climbed up to the top of the backrest, positioning himself like some oversized feline gargoyle. From that perch, he could see the room, the window, the street, and more importantly, he could hover directly behind Clara, his head looming over hers like a warm, breathing neck pillow. It would have been funny if it weren't so completely inconvenient. Every time she leaned back, she'd bump into a giant, fuzzy leg. Every time she adjusted her seat, he adjusted with her, shifting slightly to remain perched above, as if he were the writer and she the pet. And then there was his tail. His thick, happy tail thumped against her shoulder each time she typed a sentence he approved of, which, based on his frequency, appeared to be completely random. At first, Clara tried to fight it. She nudged him down. He climbed back up. She bought a second pillow to reclaim her space. He took that as an invitation to nap on her head. She even tried closing the door to the living room, only to hear the pitiful, exaggerated groans of a 90-pound dog with separation anxiety on the other side. Eventually, she gave up. And strangely, that's when things began to change. With Murphy curled on the couch's headrest, his heavy breathing a low, rhythmic metronome, Clara found herself writing differently. Slower, yes. More crookedly, hunched to the left because of his massive paws. But something about it felt looser, more human. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the window and the scent of weak coffee filled the room, Murphy slid into his usual position above her. His chin rested gently on her shoulder. His breath tickled her neck. Her back throbbed from leaning sideways for hours, but she didn't move. Instead, she stared at the blinking cursor on her laptop, stuck at the end of a chapter she hadn't been able to finish for months. It was a scene she'd rewritten a dozen times. A woman leaving behind everything she knew, stepping into the unknown after a profound loss. Each time Clara tried to write that final moment, it fell flat. Too neat, too easy, too false. But that day, something clicked. Maybe it was the steady pressure of Murphy's body against hers. Maybe it was the strange comfort of his snoring, like the low hum of an old heater. Maybe it was the way he had forced her, literally, to shift perspective. Whatever it was, Clara took a breath and began to type. The words didn't come in a rush. They came slowly, like a conversation she was finally ready to have. Honest, unpolished, real. Her fingers moved gently, shaping each sentence with care, no longer chasing perfection but simply following truth. Outside, the sky darkened. Murphy didn't stir. When she finally paused to read what she'd written, her chest tightened, not with stress, but with relief. The scene was done. After all those months of blank screens and abandoned drafts, she had finished it. She looked over her shoulder at Murphy. He was fast asleep now, having slid down from the top of the couch into a crumpled cardboard box on the floor. One paw dangled out, twitching in a dream. His mouth was slightly open, tongue poking through just enough to make her laugh. He let out a soft, rattling snore, something between a wheeze and a hum, and Clara closed her laptop. The sound was oddly comforting, like white noise played just for her. She didn't realize until that moment just how tightly she had been clinging to control, to productivity, to the idea that healing only counted if it came with progress. Murphy didn't believe in any of that. He believed in comfort, in odd angles, in licking the rim of her coffee mug when she wasn't looking and nestling himself into the smallest spaces possible. And in his chaotic, inconvenient, utterly strange way, he had given Clara something she hadn't known she needed: permission to let go, not just of word counts or postures or deadlines, but of the pressure to hold it all together. Later that evening, she sat on the floor next to the box, resting her head against the same pillow he had stolen earlier. She whispered, "I think you're rewriting me." Murphy opened one eye. Then, without a sound, he closed it again and kept snoring. And in that moment, Clara realized, sometimes the best edits don't happen on a page. They happen on a couch with a crooked spine, a full heart, and a pit bull who thinks he's a cat. Clara had once believed that inspiration lived in quiet corners, on bookshelves, in coffee mugs, in the rustle of trees outside her window. But ever since Murphy arrived, her quiet corners had been hijacked by fur, drool, and 90 pounds of unapologetic unpredictability. He didn't just claim the couch or balance like a circus act on the headrest. Murphy had discovered a new favorite place, the desk. Not beside it, not under it, on it. One rainy morning, Clara found him lying sprawled across her laptop like it was a sun-warmed slab of concrete. He was fast asleep, snoring gently, paws tucked neatly beneath his chest. The screen beneath him had gone black. The keyboard was being gently squished into the wood by his full weight. "Murphy," she whispered, nudging his flank with 2 fingers. He didn't move. He let out a long, satisfied exhale through his jowls. Clara sighed, rubbed her temples, and grabbed a notebook instead. That became the new routine. Every time Clara sat down to write, Murphy followed. And not to the floor, or the soft rug she had laid out just for him, or even the chair she tried to bait him with using treats. No. Murphy would leap, sometimes gracefully, often not, onto the desk and arrange himself across the laptop like a cat guarding a treasure. It was exasperating at first. The first few days, Clara tried everything to deter him. She gently pushed him off. He climbed back up. She moved the laptop to a different table. He found it. She even tried writing at the kitchen counter, until he jumped onto a stool beside her and rested his chin on her shoulder, breathing slowly into her ear until she couldn't help but laugh. Eventually, she gave in. She let him sleep there, let him drool over her space bar, let him crinkle the pages of her notes by shifting his body mid-nap. And oddly, that's when the words started returning. Clara began scribbling observations, not of fictional characters, not of plot arcs or themes, but of Murphy himself. She wrote about the way he tried to fit into impossibly small cardboard boxes, determined to make them his own, no matter how many limbs spilled out. She wrote about the way he licked the rim of her coffee mug when he thought she wasn't looking, then looked proud of himself afterward. She wrote about the sound of his breathing, slow and steady, as he lay near her, like a kind of metronome that kept her heart from spiraling too far into anxiety. And the more she wrote about him, the more she realized. This wasn't just distraction. It was discovery. There was something beautifully absurd about how Murphy lived. He didn't follow rules. He didn't perform tricks. He didn't care about what made sense. He simply was. Clara, for most of her life, had tried so hard to fit into expectations, first as a daughter, then as a writer, later as a woman grieving quietly, politely, never messily. But Murphy didn't bother with that. He loved his cardboard boxes. He loved pressing random keys on her laptop. He loved being exactly who he was, loud, strange, impossible to define, and expecting to be loved just the same. And maybe, Clara thought one night as she watched him twitch in his sleep, that was the lesson she needed. Not how to be productive, not how to be strong, but how to be loved without needing to be anything other than exactly herself. The next morning, she pulled out a fresh journal and wrote the title on the first page, The Great Couch Rebellion. She had no outline, no plan, just pages of scattered notes about a dog who thought he was a cat who was silently plotting revenge, and a woman who was learning, one day at a time, how to let go of everything she used to be. The story poured out in fragments. Some of it was funny. Some of it was quietly aching. Some of it felt like letters to Juno. Some of it felt like letters to herself, but all of it felt real. And Murphy, sprawled across the desk, eyes half-lidded, one paw twitching in a dream, was there for every word. He wasn't a distraction anymore. He was the muse she never saw coming, the heart she didn't know was still capable of beating, and the most beautifully ridiculous reminder that healing didn't have to look tidy or even human. It could come with floppy ears, bad breath, and a strange obsession with warm electronics. And somehow, Clara thought, that made it even more true. Clara had always believed that anything worth loving needed some degree of order. That love, like writing or cooking or parenting, required structure, a routine, boundaries, progress. So naturally, once the novelty of Murphy's quirks began to wear off, she did what any overachieving adult clinging to control would do. She tried to fix him. At first, she downloaded a dog training app. It came with upbeat voice commands, a set of YouTube videos, and a virtual clicker that made a cheerful ding every time she followed the steps correctly. She sat cross-legged on the floor with Murphy in front of her, her voice bright with forced optimism. "Murphy, sit." He yawned, loudly, then blinked at her, shuffled in a half-circle, and collapsed sideways with a dramatic grunt. "Murphy, down!" He rolled onto his back and snorted at the ceiling, his legs flopping open like he was preparing to make a snow angel. The app said to be persistent. She tried again, and again. The only consistent result was Murphy's growing collection of new nap poses. So Clara called a local trainer, a young woman named Beth, who specialized in stubborn but sensitive breeds. Beth arrived with a belt full of treats and confidence. "He just needs a job," she said. "Structure, discipline, purpose." Clara watched as Beth tried command after command, offering praise, treats, redirection. Murphy responded by lying flat on the ground, lifting one paw lazily, and then slowly crawling into a nearby potted plant as if to escape the pressure of expectations. Beth stared at him. "He's unusual." Clara nodded. "You have no idea." After Beth left, Clara sat on the edge of the couch, watching Murphy nap inside the large ceramic pot that used to house her peace lily. Now it housed a dog, legs dangling over the rim, tail twitching with satisfaction. She sighed, then laughed, then took a picture. Still, determined not to give up, Clara tried hiring a pet sitter to help establish some routine. Jessie, the sitter, was a bubbly college student with a background in animal care and a firm belief in morning jogs. Day 1, she arrived with a leash and energy. Day 2, she texted Clara a photo of Murphy lying in the middle of the sidewalk, belly up, refusing to move. Day 3, Jessie quit. Clara stood in the kitchen reading Jessie's message, which included a kind apology and the phrase, "He broke my spirit," and felt the first true sense of surrender. Murphy didn't want training. He didn't want to perform or please or win approval. He just wanted to be nearby. And maybe that was enough. Clara began watching him with new eyes. She noticed how he always positioned himself between her and the front door, as if silently promising protection. How he followed her from room to room, not because he needed something, but because he didn't want her to be alone. And then there was Tuna. At first, Tuna had been Murphy's fiercest opponent. A glare here, a swat there. He had taken her box, her favorite sunlit patch on the rug, her title as sole household weirdo. But over time, something softened. Maybe it was Murphy's lack of aggression. Maybe it was how he never retaliated when Tuna slapped his nose or stole his spot. Or maybe, like Clara, Tuna began to understand that Murphy was just different. One afternoon, Clara walked into the living room and stopped in her tracks. Murphy was curled up inside the old cardboard box, as usual. But this time, Tuna was inside too. They lay together in a perfect yin and yang, his large paw resting lightly over her tiny body, her tail curled around his leg like a ribbon. She grabbed her phone but didn't take a picture. Some moments deserve to live only in memory. From that day on, they became an odd little team. They shared boxes, beds, and sometimes even food, though Tuna made it very clear who was boss. And Clara? She stopped trying to teach. Instead of controlling, she started listening. She paid attention to the rhythms of her home, the way Murphy always knew when she was feeling low, the way Tuna seemed to soothe his overactive dreams with a soft purr in the night. She noticed how peace could exist without rules, how comfort could bloom in unexpected places. Murphy didn't need to be shaped. He needed to be accepted. And Clara, she needed to stop trying to fix things and start letting them be what they were. Beautiful, imperfect, untamed. One night, as rain fell softly outside, Clara sat on the floor beside the couch. Murphy was snoring gently, sprawled across 3 pillows. Tuna was tucked into the curve of his belly. Clara leaned back, her head resting against the armrest, and let the quiet fill her like breath. There were no commands, no structure, no schedule, just the steady hum of 2 hearts nearby. And in that stillness, she realized something simple and true. Sometimes the greatest love isn't in teaching someone how to behave. It's in simply choosing to stay. The Great Couch Rebellion had started as a private joke, a phrase Clara had scribbled in the corner of her notebook one morning after Murphy knocked her coffee over for the 3rd time while reclaiming the couch for his morning nap. At the time, it had felt like nothing more than a way to cope with the chaos, her own and his. But somehow, that title stuck. Bit by bit, word by word, the book took shape. Not a novel in the traditional sense, not a story with neat chapters and carefully mapped arcs. It was a messy, meandering collection of vignettes, snapshots of life with Murphy. Funny ones, strange ones, the kind that don't fit neatly into genres but somehow still feel like home. And to her surprise, people loved it. They sent emails, left comments, shared their own stories of dogs who acted like cats, of pets who helped them grieve, of cardboard boxes that turned into safe places. The book sold well, better than anything Clara had written in years. Her name appeared on websites again. An old friend called to congratulate her. Her editor, once skeptical of a manuscript with chapter titles like "He Sat on the Vacuum and Called It Love," emailed her with 3 exclamation points in the subject line. But Clara didn't celebrate, not in the way people expected. She didn't throw a party, didn't buy herself a new couch, though goodness knew the old one had suffered. She simply kept doing what she'd been doing, writing when she could, resting when she couldn't, and sitting beside Murphy in the evenings while he snored softly and Tuna purred like a low engine. And then came that one night, the one she would remember long after the royalty checks stopped arriving, long after the cardboard boxes were gone. The pain had started in the afternoon, a dull ache in her lower back that grew sharper with every passing hour. She'd been sitting too long again, hunched in the same awkward position that allowed Murphy his usual perch at the top of the couch. She shifted, stretched, stood up, sat down. Nothing helped. By midnight, her whole body felt off balance. Not just her back, but her chest, her arms, her head. The weight of the day pressed into her like a slow tide. It wasn't just physical discomfort. It was the kind of exhaustion that sinks into the bones, the kind you don't know how to name. She tried lying down. That made it worse. She tried distracting herself, TV, music, a podcast about history, but everything sounded tinny, far away. So she sat on the floor, back against the cold wall, legs pulled in. The silence was thick. The only sound was Murphy breathing above her, tucked into his usual spot on the couch, and the occasional creak of old floorboards adjusting to the night. And then, unprompted, she sighed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just one breath, heavy with all the things she didn't want to carry anymore. And that was when she felt it. The couch rustled gently, then a soft thump, Then the familiar sound of slow, deliberate steps on hardwood. Murphy appeared beside her. No tail wag, no bark, no performance. He simply walked up, looked at her once, deeply, silently, and then lowered his head onto her lap with a sigh that mirrored her own. She froze. Tears came before she could stop them. Not sobs, not gasps, just quiet, steady tears that had waited too long to be acknowledged. She placed her hand on his head, and Murphy didn't move. Didn't try to lick her tears, didn't paw at her, didn't shift away. He just stayed there, warm, present, real. Clara didn't say anything for a while. Her fingers moved gently through his fur, feeling the soft patch behind his ear where the color darkened, the way his breath caused a tiny rise and fall in her legs. And slowly, something inside her softened. It was the first time since her mother's funeral that she had cried without guilt. The first time since Juno passed that she hadn't felt entirely alone. There was no one else there to witness the moment. No camera, no page to fill, no words to be clever with. Just a woman, a dog, and a silence that didn't demand anything of her. Later, as she leaned against the couch, her eyes red but her chest lighter, she whispered without even meaning to, "Thank you." Murphy looked up briefly, then settled again. He didn't need a reason to be there. Didn't need to understand her grief, or fix it, or turn it into a life lesson. He just showed up, as he always had, as he always would. Love like that doesn't ask questions. It doesn't need a name or a label or a tidy definition. It doesn't care about species or roles or whether one of you is supposed to be the healer and the other the hurt. It just is. And on that quiet night, in that small house filled with coffee mugs and crumpled notebooks and fur-covered furniture, Clara finally understood. Some bonds don't come from training or planning or even words. They come from showing up, from staying close, from saying nothing and meaning everything. The manuscript was done, the edits finalized, the final proof approved. And yet, Clara didn't rush to place the first printed copy on a shelf or frame it or even slide it neatly into her desk drawer alongside her older novels. No, she had something else in mind. She crossed the living room in bare feet, holding the thick paperback in her hands like a sleeping bird. Its cover was soft matte, the title printed in bold, gentle letters. The Great Couch Rebellion. Below it, a simple image. An outline of a dog curled up in a box, his tail flopped over the edge. Murphy's signature pose. She reached down to the old, slightly dented Amazon box resting beside the couch. It was creased at the corners, the flaps frayed from months of being stepped on, sat in, and occasionally chewed. Clara had considered throwing it out dozens of times, but she never could. It had become more than just cardboard. It was Murphy's kingdom, his sanctuary, his chosen space in a world that hadn't always made room for him, and now it would hold her story. She gently placed the first printed copy of the book inside, resting it on the soft blanket Murphy had dragged in one rainy day. As she did, her eyes stung with something like joy, something like grief, maybe both. Then, on the spine of the book, just beneath her name, she pressed a small sticker, one she had custom-ordered weeks ago. It read, "For the cat who barked, snored, and saved my writing soul." Clara stared at it for a long time. She had written it on impulse, late one night after Murphy had climbed into her lap with his usual dramatic flair and fallen asleep while she was mid-sentence. But the words felt more true now than ever. He had saved her, not with tricks or heroics or grand gestures, but simply by being, by refusing to fit into any mold, by choosing her day after day with steady breath and sidelong glances, by curling into that box like it was the safest place on earth, teaching her, without saying a word, that safety has nothing to do with space and everything to do with presence. That afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. Clara sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, a warm cup of tea resting between her palms. The light poured in through the window, soft and gold. Outside, leaves danced in the wind, and the hum of distant life moved on without urgency. Murphy was asleep, of course, not on the couch, not on her feet, but exactly where he always returned, the cardboard box. His legs were tucked, head resting gently on the folded edge, his chest rising and falling in a slow, faithful rhythm. Every so often, his nose twitched, or a paw flinched, dreams of squirrels maybe, or the Roomba he still believed was a sentient pizza. Tuna sat above on the highest cushion of the couch, her tail wrapped neatly around her body, eyes half closed but always alert. She watched over Murphy with a mix of tolerance and ownership, like a reluctant older sibling who'd long ago given up pretending she wasn't deeply attached. Together, they looked like they'd always belonged there. Not pets, not projects, just beings, whole and strange and entirely themselves. Clara exhaled slowly. It occurred to her that not too long ago, she'd been terrified of falling behind, of disappearing, of writing something that didn't matter, or worse, of not writing anything at all. But now, she no longer wrote to prove anything, not to publishers, not to critics, not even to herself. She wrote because her soul had something to say, because Murphy had reminded her what it was like to feel wonder again, in the smallness of a box, in the warmth of shared silence, in the silly, unfiltered beauty of a creature who didn't care about rules. And in doing so, she'd found her voice again. Not the sharp, practiced one she'd used before, but a softer, fuller sound, one with room for pauses, for laughter, for tears, the kind of voice that knew healing didn't happen in chapters, but in moments. Clara took another sip of tea and glanced at the open box beside her. The book rested quietly beneath Murphy's paws now, nestled into his blanket like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there. And maybe it had. Maybe this had never really been about a comeback. Maybe it was about becoming. Later, as the sun dipped low and the room turned amber, Murphy stirred. He opened one eye, lifted his head slightly, and gave her a slow blink, the kind that spoke volumes without sound. She smiled. "You ready for dinner?" He didn't move, just let out one of his signature sighs, long, theatrical, and oddly comforting. From the top of the couch, Tuna flicked her tail once, then resumed her nap. Clara stood, stretched her back, and ran her hand along the couch cushion, her fingertips brushing the spot where Murphy had once ruled like a gargoyle king. Everything in the house had changed. And yet, nothing truly had. Love, after all, doesn't always arrive in the form you expect. Sometimes it comes with mismatched paws, cardboard boxes, and a refusal to sit on command. But when it does arrive, unapologetically, imperfectly, it doesn't just fill the empty spaces. It rewrites you, from the inside out. Clara walked into the kitchen, her heart light, her mind still humming with words. Not because she had something to prove, but because finally she had something to feel. And somewhere in the living room, a dog who thought he was a cat stretched inside his box, guarding a story that, like him, had no need to explain itself. It simply was, and it was enough. As the box closes on Murphy's story, maybe what lingers isn't just his snore or his love of laptop naps, but the quiet truth he left behind. You don't have to be what the world expects to be worthy of love. As Maya Angelou once said, we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to Veil Marks. Every new subscriber is a light that keeps this creative fire alive and helps us craft deeper, richer, more meaningful stories for you. Thank you for being here. You are part of this journey now.